that's why I'll never drink Southern Comfort and lemonade ever again.
So, welcome to the Poocast here, the last day surprise stare games. We have Alan and we have Tony.
You said Poocast.
Sorry, is this not the cop channel? I'm obviously doing the wrong thing. So here we are on Sunday. I've got a cup of tea, and Alan has got a gin.
I've got a gin, yeah.
I've got Tony, a digital virtual bottle of beer.
And Tony is gesturing quite crudely. And here we are at the last day of the Surprise Stare Game stream. So where we left our heroes was after the almost catastrophic partnership with a British publisher that is no longer around. They published Fuzzed and were back on the way up. So when Surprise Stare really came, I think, to worldwide notice was Tony's game, Snowdonia. This is what people know Surprise Games for. This is what people know Tony for. So what was the conception of Snowdonia?
It was Spiel 2005. So we're talking 2006. It was that sort of period. And railway games were becoming quite big on the back of Age of Steam. So Age of Steam really kicked off everybody wanting to do a railway game. So there was Railroad Dice, I think, had come out either 2000 2006. Having our little jokey conversations with our mates, which used to stop by at the stand, and it was lovely to see them. And they said, well, what would you do? What would you guys do if you designed a railway game? I said, that's a good question. And I just blagged an answer. And I just sort of took the complete contrary to what everyone else was doing. I said, I'd do a single railway. I wouldn't do a railway network. Yeah. And I would do a game.
Don't run any trains on it.
Yeah. You just do the digging rather than you would do the digging rather than get imaginary, paying money for shares in stuff. And all this stuff is done out of sight. And whenever you say things like this at Essen, and Alan knows this as well, and Charlie knows this, when you say game ideas at Essen, they kind of persist and they have to be thought through to either the ridiculous close it off conclusion, or you end up putting a prototype together.
Yeah.
How do you remember all of that stuff going forward?
I think we had it was probably one of those things where we had a conversation on a ferry, and there was a kind of throwaway remark about what. We know there are things called railway games. What would be Surprise Stare's railway games? And we're thinking, because we tend to do off-the-wall stuff. Of course. Illustration of the point. Thank you, Charlie. Ta-da. Our famous, not yet published game, Marjorie's Barge. That was just a name plucked out of the air by Tony, I think. It came somewhere out of a corner of Tony's Tony's brain.
His brain is a game.
Exactly. It was a name that was kind of presented at one of these little chats we had on the ferry. We're all hyper after the proper spiel. Unlike today, we're not really at all. And I think we even started designing Marjorie's Barge a bit, but we didn't get very far. It was just it was a canal game. And it was one of those types of things we thought, well, we're supposed to be, surprising. So what would Surprise Stare's take be on a railway game? And eventually the idea of you're not great railroad tycoons or anything like that. You're just a labouring gang, actually literally digging the track out, smelting the iron to make the rails, laying the actual track, building the stations out of
Nick in the comments actually asks us, how come Paperclip Railways came before Snowdonia?
Oh, right.
And
yes.
Snowdonia kind of went through two phases. Yes. The first phase, I was thinking of something sort of a contract-based Age of Steamy type game, literally with the same.
I mean, in fact, that was one of my contributions, which didn't actually come to fruition, because I played a game, and it was a small box game about real estate, and the nub of the game was these contracts which you had for producing buildings, but no single player could actually make the larger contract, the medium and the most profitable contract. You had to have a partnership, And the game there was all about, well, I'm going to bring to the contract some of the laborers. Somebody else is going to bring the actual, building materials. Somebody else might actually buy the land itself. But together, you make the large contract and make profit out of it and split the profits. And I thought, well, that would be a really good. And this was a relatively old game. I thought, well, maybe we can apply that to the Snowdonia concept, the building of the railway.
And so why did you choose Snowdonia? Is it because you're Welsh and it's sort of an iconic Welsh thing? Is it because it had the railway, the single line railway that went up? Or
it's the only single line railway I could bring to mind when we were asked the question originally. And to go back to the sort of the two bits, I mean, it came from that. So it was always going to be the Snowdon Railway in my mind. I always knew that's what it was going to be about. But after that first phase, I put together a prototype, and I remember Alan, Charlie, and I sat in my library room. We were playing through it, and it was a bit heavy, clumsy. It didn't really quite work, but it wasn't a million miles off of that kind of thing. And we felt that the bidding for the shared contract seemed to work all right, and I would go away and think about it. And I put it on one side and completely forgot about it, because at that point, we were kind of looking at other things that needed to next. So we're talking 2006. So we're looking at Tara would have just come out. We're looking at Scandal and Confucius picked up momentum very quickly, and we spent a lot of time playtesting that. And so these tickle in the back of your mind for the longest time. It sort of coincided me getting really stuck into working in London. So when I wasn't around as much at weekends to sort of take this forward with Alan. So this kind of worked quietly on the trains as I made notes in my notebook. And so in that period of time, other things that had been bubbling away sort of took precedence. So
it was a long gestation period.
It was, but it went through multiple iterations in my mind.
Because it was a two-part game for quite a long period, because the idea that we had originally was that weather should be a central part of the game, but the weather further up the mountain might be different from the weather at the base of the mountain. So the idea was that you'd have some kind of weather system which would be slightly more gentle at the bottom and then get harsher at the top. So there's a two-part element to the just part of the original design.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that resolved itself when I got to sort of probably about 2009, when I was going regularly to London on board, where I put a second prototype together, and using my notes from my train notebooks, it was a very different beast to the first iteration. It was a completely different game, and what I effectively did was just sort of redo it without realizing it. I thought I was working on this original idea, but what came out on the paper and on the cards was actually a completely different game. And by that time, I'd been heavily influenced by games like Le Havre and Agricola, in the way that the physical presentation was done, the way that the timing of the game seemed to work. And so a game that originally had two halves for weather purposes became a game that had two halves for scoring purposes, for instance. Rather than scoring at the end, you'd have a halfway point, you would score, and then you'd see what's happening in the second bit. But certain things are already in there from the very beginning.
Was the worker placement always in there, or did that come later?
Yeah. No, it was always worker placement, but the original mechanism was the action spaces changed during the game. Now you have it where the action spaces are set by the number of players and the scenario playing at the beginning of the game, and that's it. They don't change. But what happened in the very, very first version was that every round, one of the actions would be replaced with a different version of that action, either better or worse or cheaper or more expensive. And it kind of kept things on the player's toes. And I've kind of tried to reuse that in other prototypes since, but actually, in reality, it's actually a pain in the ass, because you can't do any planning if a reasonable action is suddenly made very unreasonable. You could have been preparing a third of the game for that something to happen, the timing, and then you just get screwed over by the turn of the cards. So that kind of thing got ditched. I'm going to go back to what I'd like to do before we carry on with Snowdonia, go back a bit, sort of answer Nick's question about pay-per-click railways, but also mention Totemo, because I can see Ben Bateson's on. Hi, Ben. Hi, Becky.
Hello, Ben.
Because those games are part of, I think, of my learning as a designer, but also Surprise Dare's learning post-FZD, in terms of how we approached the games that we were producing and planning to produce. having come back to ourselves for the production of our confidence in ourselves as a team grew very much, I think. And we were confident enough to say, we'll get Alan and Charlie's daughter, Vic, to come and do some artwork for us. And we began to be a bit more adventurous, but within our own restrictions in terms of the components. And Totemo, for instance, my colourful point scoring adjacency of blocks tower building game themed to totem poles, is an example of where we were quite adventurous. And we basically took an Essen with a product that we knew would only ever cover its own costs.
Right.
We kind of just thought we'd be happy to break even, because actually the whole thing was so different and unusual and really fit with our design aesthetic that we wanted to get it out there. We were really keen, because we thought this looks great for us. This looks and we had control over how we weren't aiming to have like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 copies. We were confident enough that we wanted to just basically, we were going to sell at Essen and a little bit on the side, and that was how we would kick off a bit more, and we would gradually, it would be a much more gradual process of an expansion.
I mean, it's part of the SSG ethos about doing what you want. It's part of the fact that it's, for neither of you, it's been a full-time job up until this point. Is part of that, does that give you the freedom to say, okay, we're going to make something that will only break even, and so we can actually creatively do what we wish?
Yeah, I think Totemo was a really good example of that, because I mean, the early stuff, I got quotes for how to produce Totemo when it was first designed, and it was impossible to produce economically at all. It just wasn't. The thing is, it has lots of wooden cubes with doweling the bottom, so you could stack them, and we had to have wood. You couldn't go plastic. It just wouldn't. Technically, we could have, if we were mass producing it, you might go plastic, but the aesthetic would be wrong. And it has a wooden board, so you can stick the things in. So in terms of actual price of components compared to the size of the game, it just wasn't economic. And each cube had to have printing on them. So you're talking about printing on wooden pieces, and this is back in, oh god, when was it first?
2010 was the release.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but it was on
manufacture.
But it was on. But we were thinking about it from like 2005, 2006, and we got original quotes were like astronomical. You couldn't. It's talking like £25 a unit to print to make the game, so it's just not possible.
Yeah, and it was only affordable because we decided we didn't want a box. We found out that having a bag and having a cloth tea towel as a board made the whole thing affordable. If we actually went down the traditional board game route and had a box and a cardboard board, it would have been
completely impossible. Well, no, it was even worse. It was worse than that, in fact, because the only reason we managed to afford the actual wooden pieces was several years later, we got re-quotes from Detoa in the Czech Republic, and the price of printing on wood had come down sufficiently that it actually made it economic for us to produce some copies and sell them direct. What we couldn't do was do the usual thing where selling to shops, you have to, basically you halve the cost. They have to take 50%. So we couldn't afford to do that, because that would have meant we had no profit at all, and we certainly couldn't get it into distribution channels. Also, because it was solid wood stuff, it was really heavy to post. So we had to sell it direct to cusustomers.
But we had sent a box to Japan. We sent a box of 22 copies to Japan.
Yeah, that was amazing.
140 quid.
Yeah.
But they paid the 140 quid transit. So if you think about it, they
really liked it.
Yeah, they were adding an extra tenner, an extra, £5 a copy onto the price. But it was so rare. I mean, 487 copies made it out into the world.
Yeah.
And I've got 3 copies here. So
so at this time, if you look, a lot of the designs are being done by Tony, whereas previously, you've got Tara Seat of Kings, and you've got Confucius, which are Alan's designs. And you said something that was quite telling yesterday, Alan, about how Confucius kind of put you off designing for a while. Is that true? And how did that manifest itself?
That is true. Yes, I decided that. Well, there were a couple of reasons. There was the Confucius experience, but also Tony was designing really good stuff, and was being very prolific in ideas and actually finishing stuff. And the important thing about game design is always you've got to get it finished. You have to actually have games which are ready to publish. And Tony was doing that, and somebody had to take on the role of of development, of actually managing production, and those were quite time-consuming things to do. So I felt that at that time it was better for my own well-being, in a way, I suppose, to do that, to take on that role and do that. And I was tinkering away with things occasionally in the background, but I had no capability to finish anything.
I think it's difficult to underestimate the effect that the Confucius Saga had on Alan. It's so dispiriting to see, as I keep saying it should have been the thing that propelled us into the kind of tree frog type mainstream. It should have been something that meant that we could produce a serious board game and we would have a guaranteed and eager market for that kind of game. And to see somebody steal that opportunity away from us was really, I was absolutely bloody furious. And Alan is the nicest man on the planet. So I can't imagine really how seething and how damaging that must have been for him underneath the surface. Because, I F and blind, and I always express my stuff much to my own detriment, but I just cannot imagine how that must have felt to have that.
I tend to express myself to my wife. I don't beat my wife, I should stress. but I
wanted to find out after 20 years.
As Charlie would say, I do have the occasional rant, and I'm very sweary. I'm very sweary when I'm not in public. Aren't I, Charlie? She's there somewhere lurking in the background. But so yes, I wasn't bottling it up, but I found that I couldn't focus on. I couldn't be creative, but I could do the more I could do the other side of things. I could do the business stuff, because I was a project manager for a lot of my career, and I could do that. I could manage things, and I could do the backroom boy things, if you like, and I could do rules writing. So I did a lot of that. Oh,
well, I was quite fecund at the time, around that period of time. I really seemed to hit a seam. I just everything. Paperclip railways came out of string railways. I saw string railways at Spiel. Hisashi Hayashi's fantastic, daft, stupid 20-minute string-based filler. And I had an expectation of what it was about before I bought my copy. And then I bought my copy and read the rules and played it through. And I thought, hang on, this is not what I was expecting it to be. I'm really enjoying it, but actually this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And actually, I think I could do my version of a game like this, a railway game with a quirky kind of building element to it. And the best way would be to do it is using paper clips. And it sort of fell onto the paper literally on one train journey from High Wycombe into London Marylebone. By the time we got off the train at Marylebone, it was there in my notebook. The structure of the station cards, the rules about drawing versus paying cards to paper clips, even how many paper clips I wanted to have in the game. It was all there. Back to Alan and Charlie, and we go to a playtest session, as I was still doing at that time. And I present something like this, and the Guilds of London was boiling away in the background as well. I must have been quite overwhelming, really. But I was looking at these things going, well, I can't think of anything else I need to do. It seems to be ready. What do you guys think? And they would go, well, yes, it seems to be ready. So how are we going to work out?
And I think the
paper clips per colour.
It's very similar to Tatemo in production, in a sense, because we kind of felt, it's lots of paper clips. It's quite heavy, but so it's probably not something we can get mass produced or have. We can't really have like 1,000 copies. Also, it might be a huge risk to do large numbers of copies of this because it could go horribly wrong. So we thought, well, we can do it ourselves. We actually, we can go right back to first principles and just get all the components ourselves, collate them all, do the whole thing ourselves, and just do a few hundred. I think we did. Was it 200 of the original? I think it was 200 of the original.
We did 120 for the UK Games Expo, the first edition, and the boxes were shirt boxes. They were
that's
really flimsy.
They were
and
cheap.
Then the second bit we did for Spiel the same year. We did 300 copies.
Yeah.
And we did them with a local printer just to get boxes. And I remember you stood at the kitchen counter using a shrink wrap machine we borrowed from
that's right. Yeah,
shrink wrapping 300 copies of Paperclip Railway while we were going around. There are photos on my blog. At this point, I was well into sort of blogging this stuff. And there's photos of us going around the table.
Yes.
Sort of putting
weighing out. Oh, we had it. We bought an electronic weighing machine, so you didn't have to count them. You didn't have to count the paperclips. We knew what the weight of 64 paperclips were. So it's actually
2.1 grams. 2.1 grams weight of 64 paperclips. And I got the paperclips from a local company in the Forest of Dean. They were based on a huge industrial site, which was their original company's industrial site. But the only thing that was working anymore on the entire estate was the bit of the factory that made paperclips and the office that sold the paperclips. Everything else, all the buildings had fallen into disrepair. But I thought it was really cool. I went to collect all of the components I needed for Paperclip Railways and stuffed them in the back of my little Volkswagen Polo and drove them back home through the forest. It took me an hour's round trip to do it. It was cool, really cool.
It's really cottage industry gaming. It's good.
Yeah.
And so what's the reputation of Surprise Stare at this point? Are you because I'm familiar with the company. I got into gaming around about 2012, and at this point, Surprise Stare was an established thing. And we're talking about 2010, 2009, that sort of thing. What is the reputation? Are you building up that momentum, and people are starting to think this is a company that has a character that we need to come and check out every year?
I think we had that quirky character, because we prided ourselves on, particularly after Totemo, which was it's a 6+ age game, and we had gamers who could play it really seriously, but we also had 6-year-olds who could play it as well without any difficulty. And so we were getting the reputation for being quirky, and people would come along to see what we had to see what we were going to produce this year at Essen, and that was good. So we were getting a lot of repeat.
I remember Mike Gray, who designed Samurai Swords, one of my favorite games of all time. He was working for Hasbro at the time, and he came along, and he took a copy away with him because he was seriously thinking about whether Hasbro could reprint it. And we were beginning to start seeing the fruits of our kind of persistence with all the companies that so every year we would go to Essen Spiel and we would go and say hello to Wolfgang at Cosmos.
Yes.
And Bernard at Adlungsspieler and all these other people that we got to know over the years. And so we were known by the industry people as well as just, they're still here. Those guys, yeah, we like those guys. Yeah, they're all right. They're friendly. It was the reputation just by sheer persistence, bloody minded. I mean, even Martin and the guys at Treefrog would give us time of day now. It was great. We felt like we were part of the club.
Yeah.
And Wall of Shame 70 says, didn't your blog contribute to that growth? Do you think the blog as a marketing tool was useful?
I started it sort of as a marketing tool to try and big up what we were doing, because there wasn't much going on with the blogs on BGG at that point. And it seemed like a fairly an easy thing to start doing, given I love writing anyway. And I do a lot of writing when I'm on trains, whether it's cartooning or I'm writing stories or poems or whatever it is. I'm always doing that sort of stuff. But surprisingly enough, even during the years of Snowdonia, sort of being signed and the development process and the release, the blog wasn't getting much attention. I would get, anywhere up to, a massive 15 thumbs on the blog. And maybe a couple of comments if I was lucky. But again, I always thought that you've just got to persist, and eventually people will come around to it. But you've just got to keep going. Otherwise, it's no point giving up after the first week if you haven't had 1,000 thumbs. What you've got to do is you've just got to keep going, because people don't notice you for the first time. Yeah. So I don't think that was responsible, not until much, much later. I think that we just, with Fuzzed and then Totemo, Paperclip Railways, when we did On the Cards, Sebastian Bleasdale's wonderful trick-taking Flux game, people began to just saw us beginning to roll out consistently interesting things, and we were very jolly. We were very well presented. We had a sense of humor, and we were less serious, I think, because Confucius was kind of the worst thing that we could have gone through. We came through it, and we were so buoyed up by the couple of years after that really,
I think
we couldn't be killed by anything anymore. I think we were much more aware of our own limitations.
I think after Fizz, when we were more buoyed up and the other things were coming out, and we had a lot of back catalogue and we had a lot of ideas which were being developed, I think we were confident we could make a go of it. And I think the thing that takes away a lot of the stress of this is that we weren't having to earn our living on it. I mean, our families were not dependent on the income from this, and that was critical. We've seen a lot of companies that have got really good ideas, or they may have one good idea and they've got a game, but they're investing all their money in it, and the stress levels there are just massively high. It means you can't relax into it. I think after we got over the hump, we were able to relax much more into doing this thing, and that was key.
So every game basically gave us a fund with which to produce the next game. We found that there was a lovely period where everything was sold, and then it meant we could do something else, and everything was sold, and then we could do something else, and it became self-sustaining in a reasonable way. It wasn't we weren't splurging on enormous bottles of champagne and staying at the 5-star hotels. We were able to start subsisting properly as well.
And so what was because I went to the UK Games Expo for the first time in 2015, and I'd been going to Essen for a while at that point. And when I went, and that was when it was still at the Hilton, and I was so surprised in comparison to Essen, how amateurish it was, how ad hoc it was, how the companies felt like guys in their garage. And this is 2015. So what is the complexion of the British game industry like in 2010 when you're bringing out Totemo, Paperclip Railways, that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. Well,
does it still feel like blokes? It feels like blokes in garages.
Well, into that time ago, 10 years ago, it's so far behind. Well, I thought of it as being so far behind the rest of Europe and America. We were kind of amateurish in contrast, really, and we were trying to get ourselves up to any form of base one in the industry. I suppose the early days of UK Games Expo in the Cavendish in God, where was it?
The Masons Hall, wasn't it? The Freemasons.
Yes, yeah. It was. I mean, it kind of had to be like that because couldn't afford to have anything bigger than that at that stage. And certainly, I mean, some other context is that we, particularly Charlie and I, were constantly getting approached by new UK-based game designers, and we were building up our network of new friends who we had in our designers' days were developing. So we knew there was a lot of talented people coming through in the UK. I mean people like Brett Gilbert were starting off at this kind of, I'm not sure if I think Brett might have even been slightly later than that, but we were getting there was obviously a larger and larger group of UK designers who were producing good stuff, and I think we could see that we were on the road towards getting ourselves up towards some form of similarity to other European countries that were more advanced down that route. But it was like, what could we afford to do? So the early days of UK Games Expo, we felt we had to support this because we were part of the industry. We were helping other people a lot, and we wanted to be involved in this. So as Charlie has said here, we knew almost all of the game designers in the UK. Exactly, we did at that point.
Yeah.
So
we were almost became for a period of time like the Godfathers, because the only other people that anybody had ever heard of from the Brits was Martin Wallace,
right?
And Richard Breeze.
But Richard Breeze had a built-in market already, and he'd had a couple of forays into people republishing his stuff. But Richard has sailed his own furrow for 30 years and done it remarkably well, and it's wonderful and admirable, and he's a beautiful man. But really, we found ourselves just so excited by this new world, and things were picking up at Essen as well, and things. And UK Games Expo meant there was another market, even though it looked a bit like a village hall at times, and it was shambolic in its organization. It became, we became sort of, because we'd been there every year, we became the sort of the people that they looked up to as saying, well, is it worth going there? What do you do when you get there, and where do you stay, and what's the best thing, this, that, and the other.
So from our point of view, having learnt from Richard about how to deal with Essen, we felt, well, people are approaching us. Let's explain how we deal with Expo, how we deal with Essen ourselves. It's new, and they can learn from our mistakes. And we'll try and get as many people as we can doing great games and creating games. That was the idea. And
then it came to 2012, when we'd been signed with Lookout Games to do a co-production of Snowdonia. That UK Games Expo took on a very different palette for me, because we had one of the, not since the days of Confucius, when there was a big scrabble to get copies of Confucius, we had one of the games of the show. And I remember when UK Games Expo had Brass being premiered at it, 2008, I guess that would have been 2007 perhaps, and how exciting it was to be in the room with a game that would go on to become such a big success. And in 2012, Snowdonia was one of the games that was appearing on people's lists of things to look at, because they knew it was coming out at Essen, and it was coming out with a big company. And we had to kind of prepare ourselves for that attention, and what it would mean to have to work with a bigger company. And Lookout Games made it so easy for us because they're such wonderful people.
Yeah. And so this brings me on. You've done my segue for me here. But how did you get in with Lookout Games? Firstly, and secondly, Tony, you are a unabashed, unapologetic fanboy of Agricola.
Yeah.
How does it feel to get your game published with the publisher that brought out Agricola? Does it suddenly feel like, oh my God, I'm with the big boys now?
It's not so much that I'm with the big boys, because the guys that look at Hanno and Clemens and all the other people, all the other folks there, Doris and so on, they're all so wonderful. They've never behaved, even when they were part of Mayfair, even when they were taken over by Asmodee. You never get the feeling that these people think that they're big boys and they're going to bully you, or they're going to push you around, or they're the ones that know everything. They are the most wonderful people in the world, and they have helped and nurtured us in so many ways over the years. And I presented the idea in a geek mail to Hanno, because Hanno was quite active on the Agricola forums. Especially if you said something a bit cheeky about Agricola, he would step in and sort of, make a wry German riposte to it.
Yeah.
And it was basically saying, I love Agricola. I have a game that's a worker placement game. It feels like you might be interested in it, not like it's Agricola. You'd like it because it's like Agricola. I just said, I think you quite like it. It's about a railway station. I knew that he liked 18XX games at that point, so I pitched the railway element of it as well, because I knew he liked train games. I said, it's about this railway in Wales called the Mount Snowdon Railway. Would you be interested in taking a look? And his response was, Snowdonia is one of my favorite places in the world. I love it. I go there with my family. We've been there. We've walked up the mountain. It's a wonderful place. Of course, I'm interested. It's a train game. Yes, send me over a prototype. I will have a look at it. That was so astonishing, so exciting that this person who represents my favorite games company, the guys that produce my favorite board game in the entire world, that they would even give it a time. Bearing in mind that we'd spent 10 years at that point roughly trying to get in with any games company in them.
Right.
Often
it's serendipity of game publication.
It's luck.
It's luck, and you need that.
Yeah. And 2 weeks later, I get an email from Hanno saying, okay, the 2-player game is terrible. I think you should think about a solo mode. Let's get to work. And at no point did he say, we would like to sign this game.
Right.
What happened then was an exchange of emails. I tweaked the solo version. I tweaked the 2-player version with some friends. We worked out, made sure it was play tested, sent it over to Hanno. Then we started talking to Clemens about artwork. Charlie did the infamous picture of Snowdon on the box, which I think is gorgeous. It's that lovely juxtaposition of light that's shining on that mountain, and then the sort of the blueness of the box intimates the darkness of the rain that comes always with the Welsh weather. I did the slightly cartoony workman, on it. You know, we were doing all of this stuff, and at no point did anyone say we're going to produce this many copies and you get this much per copy and all this kind of stuff. It just rolled into something that we printed out and previewed at the expo, and then we turned up at Essen, and there were 6 pallets of this game in English for us to deal with, and it sort of went in a blur. It was also the slowest of times as well, because I was really, really excited to see how this would all turn out. And then Hanno said, well, you can have some promo cards for it if you like. And I said, can I have an Agricola promo card as well? And he went, yeah, why not? And it was the beginning of my mantra of, you know, if you don't ask, you don't get. And suddenly we were asking, hopefully, for things, and we were getting things for, you know, it was really exciting.
And so, did it feel like Snowdonia put you on the map as a company? Was there a sharp difference in people who were taking notice of Surprise Dare games?
Yes, definitely. Because we were producing it with another well-known company. I mean, that's also it wasn't just Lookout Games. You Play It. We had Italian as well.
Right.
Shouldn't forget them. So it was. That really did put us on the map. The other great thing about Snowdonia, and what I think makes it a brilliant design, is that it lends itself to additional scenarios.
Yeah.
Which meant that we could keep a recurring interest in Snowdonia by producing additional scenarios. So I've never really thought of them as expansions, because expansions suggests you're adding on something which in game design terms might be worse than the original game, because if it was so great, why didn't you put it in the original game? Now with Snowdonia, you're actually replacing, it's a different railway. So you're actually saying, well, we've got this framework for railways. Here's another railway. So it can be literally any railway in the world. And as long as you've got a well-designed additional piece of mechanic somewhere that fits with the structure and is interesting, provides more interest, you've got a recognizable Snowdonia game, but with different, well thought out and well developed and fun mechanics. So that was it. That was what made Snowdonia, I think, particularly distinctive.
And I think this is where I become, because clearly everything's about me, I become familiar with SSG through listening to the Little Metal Dog Show with Mike Fox, and every so often, every few months, he'd do an episode with Tony, which was this rambling, profane, and hilarious hour of people who felt like they were sat across a table from each other, just putting the world to rights. And I thought this is super interesting, super entertaining. And is it at this point, Tony, where you start to, and of course we have to realize that everything's relative, and this is the board game industry, and no one's a celebrity in this industry, but you started to feel like someone who was known, as wide as the term is, a celebrity. Yeah,
because people refer to me as the guy that designed Snowdonia, for instance, whenever they mentioned it. And we had so many more reviews, and people often go back and get our back catalogue and review that on the back of having discovered Snowdonia. What else did Surprise Dare do? What else did Tony do? The blog began to pick up because I got a bit more adventurous. I got a little bit more confident. I got into a routine with it, in the sense, the routine of writing. And if you want to do, I decided at that point to kind of do a daily blog as well. So then you have to look at the world slightly differently if you're going to do a daily blog. I don't play enough games to blog about what games I'm playing every single day of the week. So everything becomes bloggable. And that means, because I am who I am, the nature of who I am, my humor gets in there, my frustrations get in there, my enjoyments get in there, my happiness, my sadness, everything gets in there. So I've blogged about friends who have died. I've blogged about things that have happened to friends of mine, appalling things that have happened to people I've known. I've blogged about how angry I am at the world and how wonderfully delighted and happy I am with the world. It's become a diary. And I think a lot of people have seen who I am to some extent in the blog. And that means when they see me at Essen, people would start saying, hi, Tony. not because they maybe played a game I've designed, but because they read my blog and they feel that they know me, and I'm approachable in my blog, and therefore I am approachable in person. And of course, it's wonderful to have people you've never met come up to you and say, "Hi, I'm from Portugal. My name's Paulo, and I read your blog every day." That's wonderful, isn't it?
Sure.
That's an ego massage. That's what you want. And what's so wonderful is I could spend a week at Essen and have that happen to me in 2016, for instance, and then come home and go to work on the Monday morning, and the guys at work say, "Well, what have you done last week? How did it go?" "Oh yeah, it was great. Yeah, and I saw this person and I saw that person," and their eyes glaze over and they go, "Means nothing to me.
Sure.
You're just the guy that does the business analysis. Can you just go on and do the business analysis, please?" And it brings you back down to earth with a wonderful crash. And then I can sit there dreamily looking out the window thinking, well, I did have a cup of coffee with Cedric, Chaboussi, or I did have lunch. I did share a large German sausage with Alexander Pfister. It means nothing to the guys I work with, but it meant everything to me.
I remember you introducing me to Cedric, and at that time, Lewis and Clark was my favorite game. And as silly as it is, I did feel that sort of frisson of speaking to someone who's a bit of a celebrity when I met Cedric. So it was very interesting. Bez has asked, what made the decision to start the blog, and did you think it was going to be this long-term, all-consuming thing when you started it?
Well, I kind of answered that a bit earlier in the sense that I thought it'd be a good marketing tool for Surprise Stare Games to try and let people in on what we were doing in advance. I'm not one for non-disclosure agreements. If I have a great idea that goes nowhere, I don't mind announcing my great idea and then announcing that it's gone nowhere.
Right.
I like to see that in others. I like to see a glimpse behind the curtain. So I didn't see that would be a problem for me.
Also, we weren't really engaged much with social media because we're not very good at social media. Well, we're not very good at social media marketing.
We'll get into that in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
No, I think in terms of going regularly, the long-term thing, what I did initially was I repurposed quite a lot of my old Star City Games stuff that I did for Magic the Gathering. So any of the humorous articles about Magic the Gathering clubs, I repurposed to be about board gaming clubs. I just had a new subject. I just rethemed my old Magic articles. But I very quickly ran out of steam on those, and I began doing session reports and all the new stuff. And I kind of wanted to see how long I could go doing a daily blog. I thought if I can get to 1,000 posts, that would be wonderful. That'd be a real challenge. And I got to 1,000 posts seemingly in the blink of an eye. And I thought, well, I'll just keep going until I get to 2,000. And then 2,000 sort of whizzed by. I thought, well, let's go for 3. And now I kind of want to just see how long I can go. Can I get to 5,000? Can I get to 15 or 20 years? Do I need to put a blog post deliberately set for 25 years' time? So if I've died before then, it might pop up one day. And all the guys who originally subscribed go, "Oh, I remember that guy. He used to say cunt a lot." Oh, and then shed a tear for poor Uncle Tony who's passed on. I don't know.
I'm wearing a Boydell design today.
Yeah, can you not
carries a particular word. So Alan, it was very interesting on Thursday. Someone asked the question, have you ever got angry? And your response was, someone asked you, "Oh, are you still working for Tony?"
Oh, yes.
And that prompted a response in you that was anger. Did you feel at this time that Tony was becoming the face of Surprise Stare Games? And did you think that was fine? Was there any resentment there? Or did you feel like the company was going in the direction that you wanted?
That's a difficult question. Tony was obviously much more in the limelight than I was, and that was what obviously provoked that particular question from that particular person. Sure. And I said, I don't know whether it was. I don't think I really resented that because, and we are a team and we work on the bits that we're working on. And Tony had never ever discouraged me from doing designing. He's never said, "Oh, we've got to do my games all the time and we can't do Alan's." It's in a sense, the fact that Tony was in the limelight was because I wasn't designing, and I knew that. So my feelings about that was that I needed to get myself sorted out so that I could get back into the design area and complete things. So I mean, I have got lots of things on the back burner, and some of those things I was kind of noodling around with. I mean, for example, one of the games which Tony and I laugh about a lot is my game, which is with the working title of Origins of Civilization, which was intended to be the kind of follow-up to Confucius. You know, it was one of those, and it goes back to Snowdonia as the basic concept of Snowdonia. What would Surprise Dare do with a railway game? Well, we'll make it a worker placement game, obviously, and you dig the railway. Whereas my Origins of Civilization is what would Surprise Dare do for a civilization game? So my thought of that was, well, we'll do a game which does civilization, but only up to the point at which the civilization starts. So the whole point of Origins of Civilization is it ends with the founding of the first city. That's the idea. And actually, I've done quite a bit of research on that. So, but that's been on the back burner for ages. I actually designed kind of half of it. I must have been at least 10 years ago.
Yeah, I remember playtesting it with Snowdonia. We were in the pub in Newent, and we spent half the evening playtesting an almost final version of Snowdonia, and then the other half of the evening we spent playtesting Origins of Civilization. And Ben Boffo Bateson may well have been at that session. I'm fairly sure.
It was the kind of first half of how it was going to work, and the second half I hadn't really got down. And that now it's changed completely. It's a completely different animal now, but it's still around. I was probably not happy just doing the backroom boy stuff, if you like. But that was my fault in a lot of ways, because I needed to get back into designing, which I have done now because I've been.
So when did you get back on the horse then? Because I know in the recent years you've got the war game rules, you've got the Airfix game, and then you've got the two new pocket campaign games. When were you able to sort of shake off the depression around Confucius and start designing again?
Well, it was around 2012 time, really, when Snowdonia came out. I think, looking back on it and looking at it from this perspective, it was probably the fact that we'd had that success with one of Tony's board games, Snowdonia. That probably was the stimulation for me to get off my ass and actually do some proper designing. I mean, one thing that had been noodling away for a long time was the Mission Command Normandy project, which is the big miniatures war game thing, which I was doing with Pete Connu. And that we started that in 2007, to be honest. I mean, we were working on it. That has only been published over the last, 3 years. So, I mean, that was always going to be a big project. So I had plenty of work to do in terms of design on that. And that was a war game design. And it was never going to be a massive money spin. It was never going to be an Essen thing. Because, I mean, the last thing you want to take to Essen probably is a World War II miniatures game. It's not really the thing.
Especially if the cover's replete with swastikas.
Well, yeah, we don't do that kind of thing, obviously. Yeah.
So I wasn't shy about pushing you to do something. I mean,
absolutely.
I've always been immensely supportive of Alan's wargaming stuff, even though it completely perplexes me. I have no idea what it's all about, apart from that it involves people going bang bang at each other. But that's from my perspective. 2012 opened up so many new contacts for us and so many more new sort of avenues to do things that I thought this is the perfect time for Alan to just come on, let's make use of this. Let's really capitalize on this opportunity that's been presented at our door.
But also, I think the important thing also is that, as I said before, with Snowdonia was a great game for scenarios. Now, if we're designing and publishing scenarios, and also the rest of Tony's stuff, which was great, like Guilds of London and things like that, somebody has to do the backroom work. I mean, can I be frank and say that somebody has to write the rules? Yeah. That's the kind of thing. Yeah, sure. The kind of thing we had to do that, and there's a lot of that to do. Huge amounts of work on production, and that was me. And I do like doing that kind of thing, even though I probably always have said I prefer designing stuff. I actually do like doing production as well, and it's that there's a lot of tension in that. So I gave myself that role to an extent, and I tried to do the design as well. Now, as we were getting more resources in the company, it meant that we could work with other companies, and that frees up some of the time for me to do design work as well, which is important.
And so, you had this sort of cottage industry going with this game company, and you live very close to each other in Gloucestershire. You can meet in the pub at the weekend and you can play test the games. How did you moving down south, Alan, affect the dynamic of Surprise Stare?
Well, we moved across the other side of the country rather than down south.
You can just tell my geographical knowledge of Britain is brilliant.
It's fine. Well, it meant communication. It meant that we couldn't get together face to face. It becomes a bit like now, doesn't it? Really, I mean, we couldn't get together face to face as much as we were used to doing.
I stopped working in London. I was working in South Wales.
Yeah, it makes it more disparate. It makes communication much more difficult, to be honest.
Playtesting was really difficult because we had different communities for playtesting. I mean, Alan's got a much wider opportunity for playtesting than I have in sort of the Ross and Wye Newent area. It's just there's a kind of growing apart, really, and I think that's really around the sort of the mid-teens, if you like, is where I think we began to see that we wanted different things from design and publishing. And I became less and less interested in the mechanics of actually producing something. And I would love to have just fast forwarded always to the Tuesday or the Wednesday at Essen when we would finally see the things in the boxes. That's what I lived for. I loved that bit of it. I was less interested in the mechanics of putting together, itineraries for how many wooden pieces we need and what particular Pantones we need the ink to be and all that stuff. I was lured away by the bright lights of the social side of Essen as well, board gaming. And being a board game personality is so fantastic. I can say naughty words on my blog and I don't get banned immediately, although I do if I post naughty pictures on my blog.
You found that one out.
It's that kind of thing, and I began to enjoy. So when we would go to Essen, for instance, we would drive the couple of days before the show started. We would set up in the hotel, and Alan, Charlie, and I would go out for a meal, and we'd have a sort of pre-Essen de-stress, as kind of settling ourselves ready for the chaos that would come. And then I wouldn't see them until Sunday night at the Mexican restaurant, because I would be going out with my mates from Sweden or my mates from the Heavy Cardboard Guild or Doug and Shelley from America, and we just had different groups of people that we would socialize with, and we wouldn't see each other. Because my world was much more that in the evenings rather than going back to the hotel and playing board games in the evening, or we began to sort of very much grow apart in that social aspect as well, because we were never meeting during the rest of the year. It just seemed to happen that way.
And so I get a message a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, I can't remember time, but I get a message from Tony saying there's a big announcement coming on my blog tomorrow. And I kind of had a feeling I knew what it was, and I said to Tony, is this good news or bad news? And Tony said to me, well, it's big news. It's a change, hopefully good. And when I logged on to Tony's blog the next day, it was what I'd expected. And that was the announcement that Tony was going to leave Surprise Stare. And I mean, I must confess, you get to a certain age and change isn't exciting anymore. Change starts to become sad. And I confess, when I read that, I was exceptionally sad, especially because Surprise Stare at the conventions I was going to became a sort of locus for me. It was somewhere I could go that I could guarantee to meet someone I knew. And to see that two people I liked were going their separate ways was for me, I felt it was unfortunate. And so I guess my first question is, why? Why now? After 20 years, after making the tote bags, have you decided to go your separate ways?
Can I just say artistic differences?
I would say that at times, my own ego has jeopardized the reputation that we've spent so long building up.
What does this mean specifically?
It means me getting really annoyed with the millennials and their tiresome woke virtue signaling. Gets to me, and occasionally I let rip, even if I let rip eloquently or eruditely, which apparently is a crime on the internet, based on some of the responses I got for some of my Twitter activity. I just let it rip, and it's worrying for Alan, because if someone's asked, if one person has asked Alan to his face, are you still working for Tony? There are 1,000 people out there who might still not understand that actually Surprise Stare is a team, and everything we have done and achieved is as a team. There is no one person who's done more than anybody else. Everybody has worked together for the single goal, and I was jeopardizing that. And when you look back on a moment like that, you think, okay, that's really upset me, and it's upset Alan. I can tell it's upset Alan because he sent me a telling off email to say, look, really, you should apologize. Quite rightly, I've got no problems with that at all. I think to myself, well, okay, I've stepped over a line here, and I don't want to, especially at a time when Surprise Stare and Alan is really pulling something fantastic out of the hat from his side of things with the pocket campaigns. He's really building something up. The last thing I want to do is to fuck all that up for him. And given that I'm not interested in the publishing side of things, and given that I've got a few designs that Surprise Stare is not really sort of able to do, the big box stuff again, we're not really into that again at the moment. It just felt like perhaps it's worth thinking about where we're going. And then Alan and Charlie and I had a really lovely heart-to-heart over the internet, because there's no other way to have that heart-to-heart.
Right.
And, it became apparent that actually the best way to keep Surprise Stare going for another 20 years is actually for me to get lost, because all I'm ever going to do, I can never predict whether next week I'm going to be super happy or super sad. And I really don't want to fuck it up for Surprise Stare. I can see that the pocket campaigns are doing really well. People are really engaged by them. They're lovely and innovative and perfectly packaged things in a world where there's not a lot of that about. And I don't want to jeopardize.
So I got a lot of my friends sending me messages. This was a couple of weeks before this. A lot of friends sending me messages saying, what the bloody hell has Tony said on Twitter? And then I went and looked, and I saw that there had been a conflagration on Twitter. And I can't remember the specifics of it, but anyway, there had been a conflagration. To what degree, Alan, was this for you the straw that broke the camel's back? This particular Twitter spat?
That's a very good question. I think, as Tony mentioned, 2015, 2016. I think for some while, I think we'd both been very conscious that we were going in different directions. The big box games that Tony was doing, things like Guilds of London, Alubari, even the Snowdonia Deluxe Master Set, were being done very, very well by other companies, and they were commitments which Surprise Stare games couldn't really handle. They were too big for us. We couldn't invest in those things, and those were the kinds of games that Tony is really good at designing and wanted to do. But I'd always thought, well, this is a bit odd. I mean, we can do Snowdonia expansions, and that came to an end because of the Deluxe Master Set. Although there may be more, you never know. So I'd always had in the back of my mind there, well, we had always we'd always thought of Surprise Stare Games as a vehicle for Tony's work and my work in games. We put the stuff in there, the money that we got from sales would go through that. and we would reinvest, and that would grow the company. But that model seemed not to really be working, and for very good reasons. Because in a sense, if there's a big box game which Surprise Tear can't actually handle, it's not fair on Tony to try to put that money into Surprise Tear. And in fact, for things like Guilds of London, the money that Surprise Tear got for that was largely put through buying games from Lookout and then selling them at Essen. So there was definitely a role for Surprise Tear in that, but that was a retail role. It wasn't. That's not really what we envisaged for.
Yeah, I tried
selling other people's games.
Those things to very much because I don't think I got any royalties for anything in Surprise Tear apart from either the engine, and that's because as Devium paid the royalties.
Yeah.
Kind of up front. So everything else I ever did with Surprise Tear, I wanted the money to go back into Surprise Tear. We did a weird consulting project for magazines where we designed games that would go with that, or did presentations about board games, and all the money would go into Surprise Tear.
Exactly. And in fact, I did some work for. Well, I did Airfix Battles for Modiphius, and the money for that went into Surprise Tear.
It became
relatively small
to sort of, for me to think it needs to go into Surprise Tear, when Surprise Tear isn't really contributing anything apart from table space at shows where I would be demoing, because people would come up to us and say, "What are you doing next?" And I couldn't say, "Well, I can't show you what I'm doing next."
Yeah, exactly.
There,
it doesn't fit. You see,
that
certainly
it became that sort of thing, didn't it?
Part of the difficulty with that was I mean, we could see the relevance of Tony showing his games, demoing his games at the Essen stand, but if that's not a Surprise Tear game, it seems a bit odd. And also, somebody has to man the stand and deal with customers. So it meant that if I had games, I was not in the same position as Tony. And of course, with the big box games, it takes a lot longer to demo them and show them. So there was a kind of divergence of approach to even being on the stand. So there were, those kinds of things were tricky ones. But going back to your question, I mean, that had a big bearing. I mean, there was a couple of comments from people that really worried me greatly. And Tony's quite right. The couple of people saying, "I'm never going to buy one of Tony's games again." Those kinds of comments were difficult. And people were circulating, lists of games. Don't buy these games, and that's really not helpful from a company point of view.
Sure.
So that's really that did concern me greatly, and I felt to an extent. To be fair, if it hadn't been for the COVID, it's quite unlikely this would have happened, because I think this has raised the stress levels of everybody. It's also meant that communication is a lot more difficult, and just having a games company is more difficult in this environment, a lot more difficult.
And so when you had this conference call where it was decided that Tony would leave the company, was that in your head? Was that decided before that conference call, or was that just a result of the conversation that was had?
It was in my head, because soon as Alan and Charlie said can we have a chat? I thought, okay, I know where this is going now. So I thought about it. We arranged the chat, and it wasn't long after the request. I think we're quite punctual, and we need to talk about stuff. We talk about stuff whenever we needed to. There was no. I don't think there was any shilly-shallying, was there? I mean, we were very good with each other, and not at all angry, and not at all sort of blamey or anything. I mean, I acknowledge my role in recent months of being daft. And in grand scheme of things, these are all storms in teacups. I don't give a fuck whether these people buy my games or not. There's maybe a group of 50 people. I don't care. I don't care what they think. It's Twitter. There's nothing less important in the world than
I mean, I think it's certainly a fact that Twitter seems bigger than it actually is. If you actually look at the people, you could fit them in a fairly small function room, I think.
But from our perspective, it was the moment where you kind of have to decide whether you're going to stay in the room or leave the room. And actually what Alan and Charlie were sort of mooting, it just seemed like it was correct. It just seemed actually we'd all been thinking it for a long time. And actually, let's not be silly with each other. We're great friends. I love them dearly. We've had such wonderful experiences and such terrible experiences as games people together that nothing's ever going to take that away from us.
And so where do you stand, you three, now, personally? Now the business is gone, and when we finish this stream, I guess that's Tony's last duty.
Well, the business hasn't gone. It's not going anywhere apart from
no, but I mean in terms of in your relationships together.
Well,
where do you stand personally? You're still friends. You still attend.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I think it'll be my job to bring you croissant and danishes now. I think
absolutely, yeah, I think
I'm
so.
looking to them to provide me with a Spiel.digital pass so I can get in and get all my free games.
I think that's right. And of course, I would love.
But
I would love to think that Tony will pitch games to us.
Well, we already have, haven't we? Actually, we've already co-design yesterday, and we've already got to talk about other possibilities. So,
and so that's a wonderful segue. We've discussed the contention. We've discussed the sad bits. Now we go on to the good bits. What is happening? So not for Surprise Stare Games, but for Alan and Charlie and for Tony. What lies in the future? So, Alan, you've recently retired. Does that mean Surprise Stare is now your full-time gig?
Effectively, it is. Yes. I'm because of COVID. I'm still working through what that actually means. Because I retired at the end of December, but I had some little bits and pieces, as you do, hanging over me. So it was about as we were going into lockdown that I actually stopped doing my normal day-to-day work, and I've closed down my other company, which was APS Limited. So I've stopped doing my information management work, and I've retired as a partner from an information management partnership that I was in. But that happened at almost exactly the time as lockdown. So from my own point of view, I don't know what change is a result of that and what changes as a result of retirement. So it's kind of been a really, well, I mean, 2020 has been a weird year. There's no surprises there. So I don't know quite how it will settle down yet, but my intention is to be, yes, full-time, effectively full-time, whatever that means when you're retired, on designing games and running Surprise Stare games and publishing things.
I mean, you've just had the Pocket Campaigns, the two new Pocket Campaigns games come out. What's coming out in the next year? Hopefully, if Essen happens in 2021, what's going to be on the stand?
Well, my main focus at the moment is on the Pocket Campaign series, because it's our first foray into an actual kind of branded series of games, which is kind of weird for us. But there are several people working on games to fit in those lovely small boxes. So we're working with Rob Harper on a game set in the Anarchy in the 12th century Stephen Matilda period. I'm working on what I'd love to do is have a World War II hex and counter game in a small box. And in fact, it suddenly occurred, talking about the war games this morning, this game is an old Avalon Hill game, which is uncannily similar in size to one of the Pocket Game campaigns. And I'm wondering whether the license, I just wondered today whether the license for that might be available, because that would be fab to have that. Maybe update it a bit and revise it, because I love that game myself. So there's lots of opportunities.
We didn't know about this stuff when we started. The fact you could chase down licenses, the fact
exactly.
all this, that we could reinvigorate an old design, or we've all of us have built up catalogues of our prototype that over the years that have gone nowhere. We can revisit them with new eyes now because of the market, what people like now, where things fit. The 20 years that we've worked together has given us so much experience in this industry that it could. I mean, there's no excuse for Surprise to not go for another 20 years and be completely successful with Pocket Campaigns and anything else that it does.
We also need to mention
know what it all
We need to mention the Gibson's connection, because it was when was it? Was it Expo?
A couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Expo a couple of years ago. Tony was talking to Gibson's Games about one of his projects, which has now come to fruition. Which Tony will show this thing, Waste the Rails. And they happened to mention to Tony, I think, when he was talking to them, that they were looking to do a new edition of Kingmaker. And knowing that I was a war game designer, Tony mentioned me to them, and I talked to them, and we kind of arranged for me to get involved in that. So my main task at the moment actually is the redevelopment of the 1974 Kingmaker game, which is a pretty huge project, but seems to be going quite well. But again, that's hit by the whole COVID experience, and really the problem with all this game design stuff now is how to manage game design in a situation where face-to-face play is so terribly difficult. Because for game design, we need to have face-to-face play. Simple things like, do the physical components actually work when you're sitting down in front of somebody? It's quite difficult. I mean, I could play Kingmaker with Charlie, but with the best one in the world, she's not really a Kingmaker player, So there are some major challenges, I think, in developing games in the current climate, and I think we're all still working through how to do this. In fact, I've got a meeting next week with Gibson's to talk about those kinds of issues. So that's where I'm coming from, and Charlie no doubt will post something about what she's doing, but she will always support what I'm doing. If I need to, the good thing about having Charlie sitting alongside me at her desk, being very cooperative as she always is that if I need graphics done, or if I need any kind of illustrations or layout, Charlie can do it. Oh, and actually, as Charlie says, we can't really test a 5-player game. It's not really on.
And so Tony, you talk about your Totemo, Paperclip Railways, Snowdonia period as being a period that was prolific. But it seems to me that on your blog every day you've got a new game design that you're prototyping. What's coming up for you? The last one I played of yours, the prototype, was Attentional Shipping. What's happening with these games you're designing? Have they been signed? Will they be coming out, or are you in the process of pitching them?
Attentional Shipping, I'm still I'm looking for somebody to take it on and develop it with that kind of intention for signing. But COVID's made everything difficult in terms of communicating with people. They've got their own things to worry about, but it's there. I think it's ready. I've got a couple of designs out with people for sort of evaluation. My Rome Sweet Rome multi-use card game, which I know Ben and Becky hate, which I really love. I'm really optimistic about that. It's getting some really good development attention with a mutual friend of ours, Ben. Aleph Null, which was born out of the lockdown, has come along leaps and bounds, and I believe it's mooted to be produced next year. It's not officially signed, but I mean, all the talk is around about producing it. For me, again, it feels like Paperclip Railways in the sense that it came together really quickly, went through a very, very intensive period of playtesting. I was playing it 25, 30 times a day. I was playing it in the middle of Teams meetings, because none of us have our cameras on unless it's a Friday and we're all drinking beers together. So I was playing it during boring meetings, and it's robust and it holds up, and I can only beat it 35% of the time and that kind of thing. So that's on its way as well. I've got children's game stuff. The thing with Gibson Games has made me revisit to sort of the older game mechanics and see whether they could be sort of 21st centuryized, whether we could bring some of those lovely old ideas into the new millennium. And I've been collecting for my board game museum, which ultimately I think is where I would love to be, in a happy place of running a board game museum. And designing games and selling my favorite latest games that I've picked up from Spiel in the gift shop, and evangelizing board games to the UK, whatever's left of it, in 12 months time. Just to keep doing my bit to keep the whole thing going. I mean, that it's games, everything about me, with the kids eventually moving out. They're moving out in dribs and drabs. It's not easy. I'm finding perhaps part of my general anxiety and tetchiness in the world is that I have lots of things going on at home, deeply happy games. But once we get through all of those things, then perhaps I can just be a bit more tranquil of kidney, and and just look more lightly on the world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Charlie reminds me that a couple of things that I probably should have mentioned is that we have a long-running saga of a game called Dolphin Adventures, which I've been designing
before you release the game.
designing with Neo Elder, who's a friend of ours. It's now called Echo Locations. It's currently actually with Lookout Games, although I haven't really chased that up because of COVID mainly. And I'm doing a game with Bez, a game which she pitched way back when I was helping with the UK Games Expo redesign competition, which at the moment is loosely called Hunter's Pie, although it's going to be called something else, I think. We're committed to publishing that. So there are things on the horizon. There's lots of. What I'm trying to say is there's lots of projects that Surprise Stare can be doing, and Tony has loads of projects as well, which is great. I think so. I would say that overall, although we're parting company, we're working on stuff like mad, both of us. All three of us, in fact, and there'll be still more games coming out, and it's quite likely that some of the stuff that Tony's doing that we might well be involved with as well.
So we come to the end after 4 days. We've trawled through the good, the bad, and the indifferent of Surprise Stare Games. So anyone watching this, do you have any questions for our three? Charlie's there. I'm sure she'll chip in if need be. Any questions for our three sailors on the seas of ludological destiny?
Oh, that's beautiful, isn't it?
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
Just made that up right on the top of my head. I'm not even drunk. Any questions?
Silence. Oh, okay.
So,
Bez.
Okay, logistically, the answer is I won't. Unless, and I'm very loath to go to UK Games Expo ever again. Nothing to do with Surprise Stare. I just detest it. If I have a game that Surprise Stare feel that they would like to produce, then obviously I would do my duty as the designer and turn up and do what all our designers that we've worked with over the years, Sebastian and Caroline, Sebastian and David Mortimer and so on, they've come and done their bit on the stand. I'm quite happy to do that, but I think I think it would be initially it'd be very difficult. I find it very strange and difficult to sort of be hanging around the SSG stand too much, simply because I probably burst into tears and beg for them to take me back, like some terrible American rom-com.
And so Wall of Shame 70 asks, Tony, do you get design brainwaves based on your vintage collection?
I do at the moment. I'm getting some wonderful stuff at the moment. Yeah.
I think there's a massive seam of really good ideas that have been lost in the midst of time. And so, people can. The great thing is you can take this idea that somebody had 50 years ago and dress it up as a new idea, and people think it's new. It's great.
Steady on, mate. Steady. Rails is, yes. It is
no, I wasn't.
But it has a whole scene.
No, I wasn't thinking of any particular. Example, Tony.
I am buying up every copy of Railway Rivals I can find on the internet because there are so many wonderful editions of it. It was a great little game. UPL were a very strange and unusual games company, but they made some great.
There's a game called Sea Strike which came out in 1973. It's got a fabulous combat system, and I'm just going to rip it off shamelessly and put it in one of mine.
And so R1R1-G, I think it's a robot. When will the BG Museum be opening?
Well, hopefully when the world's back to normal. I got to find somewhere. But actually, my Mrs. B, Karen, has had a wonderful idea of trying to set it up virtually online somehow. So people can sort of tour a mini version of it to get a feel of the kinds of things that I want to do. Because it's not just sticking a couple of games in a glass case and saying, "Ooh, doesn't that look nice?" I want to have puzzles, and I want to have tie-ins, and I want to have interest around that as well. I would recommend people go and have a look at the Museum of Childhood, the V&A Museum of Childhood, not just for the board game section if it's still there, but also just the way that they present toys from the last sort of 500 years. It's really wonderfully presented. I'd like to do something a bit like that, the way that they approach exhibiting things and making it more interactive.
And so Big Bad Lex is going to depress us all now.
Yeah.
Con 2021. What are the chances?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah.
It's not going to happen, is it?
No,
I mean, I'm here to facilitate conversation. I'm not supposed to have opinions. But if I was to put an opinion forward, I don't think any convention is going to happen next year. I think it's going to be a 2-year thing. And if there's an Essen next year, I'd be very surprised.
That's your Berlin perspective, you see. It's different from War Boys.
This is true.
I know.
Well, you're tier 1 in War Boys. So, Bez asks, how much design, Alan, will you do outside of SSG?
Oh, well, yeah, that's I don't know. I mean, I think what Tony and I have always done is if we do publications that are produced by other companies, we put the SSG logo on wherever we possibly can, and we have one on. Yeah, so I mean,
there underneath there it says Surprise Day Games on the Gibson box.
So we always try to do that. So I think in Efforts Battle, for instance, it's got SSG stuff in it. So I will always kind of push my games through SSG, and I think I believe I have talked with it to Gibson's about it. I know there will be an SSG logo somewhere on the Kingmaker. Whether it's on the outside of the box, I doubt, because that might not be appropriate. But certainly, SSG will be mentioned on there. Yeah. So no, I'm not going to be doing anything outside. The SSG is the vehicle for me for game design and publication. Yeah.
And it seems that
when I did this weird collectible card game for Jose Mourinho and the special one,
that was
a computer-generated cartoon that was broadcast only in Portugal, but they printed 1 million boosters in Portuguese for this TCG. Because I designed it with somebody else. But I made sure that the SSG logo, little Reg, raised eyebrow guy, Reg, was on every single booster pack. So every single booster pack had a little Reg on it, which was rather lovely, actually.
Yes.
So it seems they're allowing Americans into this stream. That's breaks my contract that I signed. But Mr. Cyrek, it's an odd name, asks, what do you think of the Empire Builder series? He wasted his very, very distant, very, very distant youth on it. Gentlemen.
I don't know about the Empire Builder series.
It's completely wasted on me. Yeah.
Must be an American thing, I assume. So, Wall of Shame 70 asks, Tony, where does your passion for trains come from? And does anyone else at SSG share it?
It came out of working on Snowdonia as I was researching the Snowdon Railway. And then as we were doing the scenarios for it, I very quickly became 100% in love with railways and trains. And yeah, it's echoed down with things like pay-per-click railways and Ivor the Engine. Ivor the Engine probably cemented everything to do with railways because of the experience. I mean, it is the first railway that I was ever aware of.
It's lovely. It's lovely. I mean, I'm not as passionate as Tony. I don't think anybody could be quite as passionate as Tony about railways, but I do like trains. And working on Ivor the Engine was an absolute dream. It was. And we've got Ivor the Engine artwork on our wall in the house. I mean, we've gone on several little, what you call it, vacational railways things in the past. And I tend to make little recordings of them, of just audio of them. So I think there's nothing quite as good as being on a steam locomotive going into a tunnel and going through, and you get the whistles and you get the kind of nervousness of people in the tunnel, and then you come out on the other side. It's just brilliant. So but I tend to go for the audio stuff because most people do videos, you see, and I think, well, there's something about just having an audio recording of something like that.
God, that's
You can put all your own visuals onto it if you like, but having the audio is really great.
I spend most of my time when I'm on holiday in Yorkshire or going up and down the North Yorkshire Moors Railway with my head out the window, just getting a face full of coal dust and smuts and steam and all that kind of stuff. It's so nostalgic.
Yeah.
I think when you realise how much of it's disappeared and what a problem that is, that it's all disappeared. There's something about it.
It is. We went to the Peak District in the first week of October, and we were walking just in the White Peaks in the lower part of it, and we were all walking around a lake, and you look on the map, and it's a disused railway line that was part of a line taking limestone from the quarries out to the Midlands, presumably, and possibly even onto the canal system. But yeah, so that was great. I mean, there are disused railways absolutely everywhere. I've worked on the Mission Command Normandy stuff, and doing the parachute drop, the 6th Airborne parachute drop. The Pegasus Bridge one. There's a narrow gauge railway that goes across Pegasus Bridge. So that it even goes into there. I haven't done a tie-in for that on the Snowdonia, but well, I did the Petersburg Snowdonia scenario, which was the US military railway. So railways are everywhere basically, and they're pretty wonderful. Yeah.
And so Wall of Shame has asked another question, and I'll slightly rephrase it because I think I already know the answer, but he's asked, would SSG publish someone else's design? Well, you've already done that with Per Sylvester's game and with David Mortimer's game. What sort of percentage do you think going forward will SSG's output be other designers' stuff?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. I mean, what I would like to do, what I would say is, if any other designer has something which might fit in the Pocket Campaign series, I would definitely be looking for those, because I think that's a good vehicle for us to get more other designers involved in SSG. I'm very reluctant to say I'll just have a look at anybody else's design from anywhere, because the trouble is that there are so many designers around that you just get flooded. You cannot review all the designs that are around that approach us. And we were going through a period of getting like a new design almost every week from somebody, and that's just a small company like us. I don't know how the big companies survive in this, but there's not enough time. So our current policy is to work with designers that we already know. So if you can get to know us, then we'll look at things. So that's how we're working with people like Rob Harper and Dave Mortimer, and others. So, but it's the Pocket Campaign series I want to really focus on.
So I've got one question from Esney, and then I'm going to ask one question, and then we shall bring an end to this proceeding, because I'm English and I'm gasping for a cup of tea. So Esney says Kingmaker was brilliant, but do you have ideas to fix the climax of the game, waiting for a plague to wipe out opponents?
Well, thank you for that one. Yes. The short answer is yes. We do have a way of fixing. We still have a nice climax of the game, but it doesn't rely on plague. So I have a short format of the game, and I think the best way that you can find out what that's all about is to contact me after the show. Contact me in other forms. There's actually a video on our Twitch TV stream about Kingmaker remodeling. So a lot of the information is in there. So I think personally, obviously I'm biased, I think we've got some really good solutions to the Kingmaker problem. And I would say that on this Kingmaker front, what I am trying to do is to be faithful to Andrew McNeil's vision of the game, because I think that is absolutely critical. And I am very strongly resisting the people who are calling on me to redesign the game, what I'm doing is redeveloping it and trying to realize Andrew McNeil's vision of what he wanted for that game.
So my final question before we say goodbye, before we say a tearful goodbye, is thinking about the 20 years that SSG has been going. What for you has been the highlight? What will be the abiding thing that will keep you warm at night when you think about SSG this far?
I think I will always remember, I think there were maybe 2 or 3 years, the first time that we were going to Essen, I'll always remember the times that we were traveling back on the ferry, and the three of us would be sat in the restaurant area with a cup of coffee and whatever we'd brought back, and we'd be trying one of the 2 other games that we'd bought out of our respective cars to see whether they were any good or not. And I would be riffing on a stupid idea I'd had mid-show. And there was one about a game called Colon, I think, if you remember, guys, where you had colored cubes that would be replaced in a tray with brown cubes, and then they would come off the end of the board. And we would just be silly because we were so high on the adrenaline, and we were so exhausted. And it's such a lovely exhaustion that you feel after that week of Spiel, because you've achieved so much. And yeah, I shall remember those exhausted times on the way back from Essen with great fondness, because they're brilliant. And
Alan?
I think it's the fact that whenever we are at Spiel, the proper Spiel, we have a particular fan who brings us biscuits. She's a particular fan of Tony's games. She always brings us biscuits, and not only that, these are specially baked biscuits that are Charlie friendly, because Charlie doesn't eat wheat. So this is someone who has taken the trouble each year that we've been to Spiel for several years now to come and talk to us and feed us, and that's just brilliant. I think it's our relationship with people like that I really treasure and will continue to treasure.
And Charlie has said Tony after the show, hyper, telling stories in the pub or restaurant, being the funniest person she's ever met. You really need to get out more, Charlie, and keeping people in stitches for hours on end. And I think we should finish with Big Bad Lex. And I think he sums up everybody's thoughts. I see this as an exciting and fresh start for all of you, and not really an end and something to be teary about. Good luck in your next project, but not you, Tony. You can't.
Thanks, Nick. And with that,